Hi, I'm Becca Washburn. I'm going to be reading out of Pitch Grain by the Brothers Washburn. You can purchase this at Amazon or at some of your Barnes & Noble's locations. I'm going to read the prologue. And try not to be frightened! A dry Death Valley wind blew through town, sucking life out of everything it touched. The wind was unusually cold for the Mojave Desert on the last day of October. It did little to disperse the heavy sulfur fumes that caught in throats of all living creatures, except one, which lay crouched under the thick oleander bushes, camouflaged and out of sight. Dark olive-colored vapors wafted from its nostrils and mouth as it carefully watched the potential prey passing within yards, laughing and waving their weak flashlight beams back and forth. Its prey didn't often come this close. There was a Frankenstein wearing thick shoes, a goblin with a dark ochre cast to its face, a witch with a long warted nose, and half-dozen other so creatures, and then it saw its target, straggling far behind the others, a ghost. Cammy struggled to keep all the kids together the best she could. No one had actually put her in charge, but at 11 years old, she was the oldest in the group of trick-or-treaters and felt they were her responsibility. Well, she was the second oldest. Cal was the oldest at 11 and a half, but he was determined to get as much candy as he could and was no help at all. Everybody keep close. Do not run ahead, Cammy called, using her best authoritative mother-like voice. Some kids had already run on to the next lighted house down at the corner. Most were just scurrying by the forbidding old Searles mansion, which they had to pass on their way to the next street. The coarse pavement beneath Cammy's feet seemed to extend into the blackness of the mansion's desolate landscaping. Streets in this part of town had no sidewalks or curbs, just rough-oiled roads that phased into bare, dry yards on either side. Of course, no one had grass. This was Trona, California, an isolated mining town halfway between Death Valley and nowhere. Cammy had been born and raised here, but still, she longed for greenery. Neither grass nor anything else she wanted in a yard grew here. While there was an abundance of poisonous oleander and salt cedars with stringy dark needles instead of leaves, both were imports and only added to the feeling of barren desolation. Occasionally, Cammy saw a miserable-looking tree with real leaves barely hanging on for life, or a small black cactus garden, but that was all the green she could find in Trona. The homes around the old mansion were especially dismal. All were small, dilapidated, and wind-beaten. Some were abandoned. Slowing slightly, Cammy peered through the dark at the enormous mansion, the largest home in town. Some said it had been built by the town's original settler, John Searles. Others whispered it was the site of many gruesome murders and had been abandoned for over 70 years. In the starlight, the stone facade on the three-story building appeared a pale, army drab green, like the skin of a rotten corpse. To Cammy, the empty windows resembled dead vacant eyes, and the immense oak double front doors loomed ominously like a large gaping mouth. The mansion was rumored to be haunted, but Cammy didn't believe in that kind of stuff. Still, the night was black, with no moon in the sky, and a chill ran down her spine as she walked by. From the corner of her eye, Cammy saw what looked like two angry red eyes reflecting her flashlight. The eyes blazed for an instant and then disappeared. Cammy kept glancing nervously at the mansion, but saw nothing. She was glad to hurry on. Turning to look behind her, Cammy saw 6-year-old Huey lagging again. Huey had insisted on wearing the classic white bedsheet ghost costume. She had heard his folks say that they would buy him a ghost costume at the store, complete with a plastic Casper mask, but that was not good enough for Huey. He had insisted on the white sheet ghost costume he saw in every cartoon around Halloween. Except, Cammy thought, in real life it doesn't work as neatly as it did in the cartoons. Holding out a candy bag was awkward with both hands hidden under the sheet, and the eye holes had been hard for Huey's mommy to place. Cammy thought the eye holes in Huey's sheet were cut too far apart. She didn't think he could see out of both holes at the same time. But in the end, it didn't matter because there was no way to keep the sheet in place. It slipped all over Huey's head every movement, and he complained that most of the time he couldn't see out of either hole. Come on, Huey, will you please keep up? For most of the evening, Cammy had been scolding him for dawdling. I'm trying, he whined and began to walk faster, but stepped on the end of his sheet costume and tripped forward. He tried to put his hands out to catch himself, but the sheets got in the way. He fell flat on his face in the middle of the road, his small flashlight blinking out, rolling away. Cammy sighed in frustration as she glanced back and forth from Huey lying prone in the street behind her to the other kids who had already moved on to the next street ahead. Just wait, just a second more, and it would strike. Its prey was now in the dark, and the other lights were moving away. Slinking low to the ground, it kept closer to the small ghost. Cal! Cammy hollered. Huey fell! Cal was Huey's older brother and Cammy's next-door neighbor. Cammy felt Cal should take more responsibility, if only for his own siblings. If you can't keep up wearing that stupid sheet, Huey, then just go back and wait in the car with Dad, Cal yelled over his shoulder as he rounded the corner. Cammy sighed. Someone should go back to help Huey. It should be Cal, she grumbled to herself. She usually thought of Cal as her best friend, but sometimes boys were so immature. Unexpectedly, a cold gust of wind blasted her with sand, blowing her a step or two sideways. Hugging herself in the chilly night air, she regretted her choice of costume, Robin Hood. While Cammy's often fantasized herself as a brave warrior protecting the innocent, the costume was not very warm. She had not anticipated the penetrating bitter wind. Before she could move in Huey's direction, she was shocked by the squeals of skidding car tires. She whirled around to see little Ruthie, the youngest in the group at 4, running out into the street in the path of an oncoming car. Cammy held her breath as she watched Ruthie stand frozen in the middle of the street, the white, burning headlights bearing down on her. Ruthie carried a small broom as part of her little witch costume and pointed it at the car as if casting a spell. Its lips slowly split apart, revealed dark green fangs, dripping putrid ooze. The dark vapors now came from its mouth in quick, short puffs as its back arched and muscles tensed. The car screeched to a stop just as its front bumper touched the end of the broom. Boop. If Ruthie had cast a spell, it apparently worked. Cammy ran to the corner where Ruthie stood in the intersection and scooped her up in her arms. Hey, you kids! Watch where you're going! The driver yelled as Cammy carried the small girl around the corner to where the rest of the little trick-or-treaters huddled. She set Ruthie down with the others and trudged over to the car to apologize. Huey slowly gathered himself up onto his hands and knees. He heard his nose crunch when he hit the road, and there was a sharp pain in his left eye. Blood flowed freely from his nose, splattering down the inside of his ghost costume. Cold and hurting, he was no longer excited about trick-or-treating. He just wanted to go home. But most of all, he didn't want the other kids to see him cry. Holding himself still, he desperately tried to stifle his sobs as hot tears ran down his face. Lost in misery, he was oblivious to his surroundings, not hearing or seeing a thing. It saw its chance. The lights had finally moved away. In 2 soundless bounds, it was there. Crunch, crack, snap. Then it was gone, taking its quivering prey with it. After apologizing to the driver, Cammy rushed back to where the other kids were waiting to check on Ruthie, who was okay but shaken up. Cal was already 3 houses further down the next street collecting candy as fast as he could. Shaking her head in exasperation, Cammy picked up the little witch and gave her a big hug, rewarded at last with a wobbly smile. She handed Ruthie over to Anne, who was dressed as a fairy princess, and finally turned back to help little Huey. When she came around the corner again, Huey was gone. She strode down the street to where he had fallen, searched in all directions. He was nowhere to be seen, but his bag of candy was still laying in the street. She picked up Huey's broken flashlight and called loudly to Cal, who reluctantly came back. "What?" he said angrily. "Huey's gone," Cammy replied, hands on her hip. "The big crybaby! He just took his spoiled little self back to the car, like I told him to do." Cal retorted furiously that his candy collecting had been rudely interrupted. "Dumb sheet ghost costume anyways. I told him it wasn't cool." With that, Cal was off again, heading around the corner for more precious candy. Cammy looked up and down the street. Huey would not have walked out into the desert. He could not have gone in other three directions around the corner with the other kids, back in the direction where his dad was waiting, or into the front yard of Searle's mansion. Since Huey wasn't with the others, and since no one would ever go into that front yard at night, he must have gone back to the car, like Cal said. Cammy turned her back to the mansion, relieved to move away, and hurried to catch up with the other kids before someone else wandered into the street. She tucked Huey's candy bag in front of herself for safekeeping. He'd want it when she saw him afterwards. 8 weeks later, Huey's picture appeared on milk cartons across Southern California, and while his picture was published all over the state, his actual face was never seen again. Pitch green.